The draft's getting closer and closer, and today I've got Hadi Kalakeche, host of Locked On NHL Prospect, to come and talk to us about a player that sounds pretty fun, but probably doesn't fit into the Blue Jackets archetype. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Let's find out.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to bring you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Solo show today. I recorded over the weekend with Hadi Kalakeche of Locked On NHL Prospect, of Dobber Prospect, to talk all about someone who the Blue Jackets could potentially pick up at 22nd overall. Before we get into that, though, I just want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. So if you haven't hit subscribe yet, please feel free to do so. We are, I believe, 9 subscribers away from the next milestone, which is very, very exciting for me personally. Hayden's also super pumped about it. And let's jump into it. I am just going to let the conversation go because Hadi is much smarter than I am and has much smarter things to say. The Blue Jackets are locked in at 22nd overall. There's a bunch of guys that could be available there. This is a way harder pick to predict than 3rd overall. We're going to talk about 3rd overall in just a minute. But right now, I've got Hadi Kalakeche, host of Locked On NHL Prospects. He does work with Dobber Prospects. He does work with Habs Eyes on the Prize. He does a bunch of prospect stuff. He's really smart about it. And we're going to talk about Calum Ritchie today, who is a name that has been on my list for ages, and I keep overlooking him. And now I'm thinking, maybe I shouldn't. So let's jump straight into it, Hadi. Calum Ritchie steps on the ice.
Yeah.
What kind of player are we getting?
Grit, for sure, 100%. He's going to be running the opposing defense into the wall consistently and constantly. He loves to throw his weight around. He's got a nasty edge about him, but he's also incredibly smart. Really good decisions with the puck. Superb playmaker. Does great work with the puck as well. He's a bit of a very versatile player in terms of, I like to call those template players. I put Jaden Perron in the same kind of boat where he's kind of a development team's dream in the sense that you can make so many different types of players out of him. He's good in so many different areas that you can pick and choose one of them and work it out. One thing with Ritchie is his skating is going to hold him back for a while, at least until it hits an NHL average. That's something that does need work in terms of his profile. But overall, I mean, he's really strong along the boards, really smart with the puck. He's comfortable hanging onto the puck for a second and then kind of deciding on which play to make. He doesn't kind of fire the puck through the first lane he sees or anything like that. He's very poised with the puck. So he's a unique profile. He's as close to Tom Wilson as you're going to get, essentially.
He's just not going to try and actively murder guys.
Yeah, that's one thing. I mean, even that's debatable, but,
Yeah, because when you started off and you were like, yeah, we're going to get grit. And I was like, oh, okay. Should we be taking a gritty player at 22 overall? Mm-hmm. But looking at his stats, I mean, he had a decent World Juniors under 18s, had 9 points in 7 games, was a point per game for the Generals in the OHL this season, and was better than a point per game in the playoffs. Is that something that kind of, do you think he's going to take another step next season? I assume he's going to be back with the Generals next season. Do you see him kind of progressing on and doing even better, or do you kind of think that for better or worse, this is just kind of who he is as a CHL player specifically?
I feel like you're going to see a small uptick. He might hit the 70, 75, 80 points next year, something like that. I mean, it's nothing major where you're going to expect him to be leading the OHL in points. He's never going to be that kind of player, but I feel like his intelligence and skill are good enough that he'll be able to produce at a decent enough level at the OHL and continue on his development path. I don't think Ritchie's a finished product. I still think there's room to grow in his game. Now, this is a player who at the start of the year was in my top 10. I was really sold on his smarts. I really liked what I saw. But the more I watched him, the more I saw some concerns with the skating, with the kind of taking himself out of place sometimes off the puck. His defensive involvement also is hit or miss. There's some flashes of brilliance defensively, but other elements where you're just like, man, if you just took a couple more strides, you'd be in good position, that kind of thing. So I feel like you can expect You can expect Ritchie to at least be, if not the point leader, one of the point leaders like he is this year with the Generals next year. I mean, if you look at the point totals for the Generals, he and Ryan Gagne were the only two players who were above a point per game or at a point per game for the Generals. It wasn't an offensive juggernaut, and Ryan Gagne is 20 when Ritchie's 2 years younger than him. So it's kind of apples to oranges there if you try to compare those two. But for me, Ritchie has a lot of room for improvement, but that's a good thing given that, he's a guy who's probably going to spend 2, maybe even 3 years in the system before seeing even any NHL action. But he's got the size, he's got the intensity, and he's got the smarts to make a really, really good impact at the NHL level. I'm certain of it.
Yeah, he feels like he's one of those guys that's going to be a really, really... He's either going to be like a decent second line guy or a really good third line guy.
That kind of thing.
And that's kind of those are good guys to have,
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like at 22nd overall, I go back and forth about like what kind of player should you expect at 22nd overall? Should you expect a top 6 guy then, or should you kind of curb your temper your expectations a little bit? But Calum Ritchie at 22nd overall is interesting. My co-host Hayden Hasson really loves Ritchie. I assume that's because he is big and gritty. Hayden really likes those types of players. But he's kind of all over the place in terms of ranking. So Bob McKenzie has him 13th. Elite Prospects has him ranked 28th. And then everyone else has him kind of in between that. Smart Scouting has him ranked 33rd overall, so he just drops out of the first round. But like, is that that feels like a big gap? Kind of where do you have him kind of going at the minute? Is he there at 22nd?
I think the thing is that teams build their rankings based on, in the first round you go for the guys you like. And then you start following the rankings. I've heard that Elite Prospects is one ranking that a lot of teams follow closely and respect very well. But I feel like he's at least a top 10 player on maybe 2, maybe 3 teams' rankings. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Those teams that are looking for grit, that are looking for intensity, that are looking for smarts. I'm thinking the Canadians. I'm thinking the Flyers, the Capitals, the Predators. He's such a fitting pick for teams that are looking for what he brings, that I feel like if he is there by 22, it's a surprise to me. I feel like he's going to go in maybe the 17-18 range. By then he's gone. But if he's not gone by then, he's probably a second rounder. It's either or for me with Ritchie. I just feel like there's no way teams are going to look at a 6'2", 190 point, 190 pound, a point a game player in the OHL, and kind of shy on him until the second round. I'm sure he's going to be there. He's not going to be a top 10 pick. I don't think the Flyers or Caps are going to go for him that early. In their range, but I feel like 17, 18, 19, if he's still there, I'm surprised. I don't think he's the 17th, 18th, 19th best prospect in the draft, but at 22, he's a decent bet. I mean, if you're looking for someone who's going to complement your Kent Johnsons and company, I feel like he would make a great complement to a center who can score, but who's more finesse than intensity and grit. Because he brings that playmaking element, so he can set up centers who can score in good areas, but he also has that element where he's able to drop the shoulder, go to the net, he's able to man the forecheck. So for me, if the Jackets are looking at him at 22, I think he's a good fit. Are there some players I would pick before him? Sure, but if that's the profile they're looking for, there's no other prospect that fits that profile better than Ritchie for me. He's the grittiest player in this ranking. Yeah.
Okay, in a minute, we're going to continue our conversation on Calum Ritchie and what he could add to the Blue Jackets. But first, I've got to let you know all about eBay Motors, because if you're building a championship team, you need to make sure that every player is a perfect fit. And it's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head on over to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. All you have to do is add your ride to my garage, look for the green check, and the part will fit, or you're going to get your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. With over 122 million parts to choose from, you're going to be back in the game in no time. It's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to US customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. What I'm hearing about all of this Calum Ritchie talk, and I'm like, okay, who do the Blue Jackets have right now, and like what kind of player does this sound? This to me is screaming Boone Jenner.
I'd say Boone Jenner's a lesser playmaker for sure, but he's a better skater for sure.
Right.
So
let's talk about that, because you mentioned that skating is his weakness.
Yeah.
And I kind of, again, I do this every single year, and I'm like, which deficiencies are the easiest to fix? Which ones are the ones that play like the NHL teams are going to look favorably on, if that makes sense? I feel like teams are happy to pick a worse skater if he has better hands, for example, or if he's fast, or if and I feel like not bad skating, if he's a first round pick, he's not bad skater, but he clearly has something to work on. I feel like skating is one of those things that teams will be like, well, just get up a skating coach and fix that. Like, am I right there?
Yeah, see, if that was his only weakness, he'd be in the Zach Benson boat for me in the top 5, top 10, but it's not. I mean, his puck skills are a concern. He's a decent shooter, but nothing overwhelming. He's a great playmaker, not the most outstanding stick handler. And a lot of the things he's good at in flashes. There's a lot of inconsistency, and that's one thing that turns a lot of teams off. One thing you're always getting from Ritchie is that intensity, is that grit, is that forechecking element, and he's got that kind of chirpy, kind of nasty edge to him that a lot of teams like and look for. It's attitude, but in a decent manner, in a manner that helps your team win. Like I mentioned, the Tom Wilsons, Brad Marchands, like that kind of attitude, a lot of teams look at favorably, especially since the Caps won the Cup, especially since the Bruins have become so dominant. That profile, that mental profile is so coveted in the NHL. But for me, the concerns is, like I mentioned, puck skills wise, very inconsistent. In terms of his intelligence, also inconsistent, especially in the defensive zone. So it's just a matter of, do you like his attitude enough that it overcomes his inconsistency as a scouting team? I'm thinking in the top 10, top 15, a lot of teams are going to look at better prospects. But once you hit the 17, 18, 19 mark, his name's going to start to come up, because like I mentioned, there's probably 3, maybe 4 NHL teams that almost definitely have him in their top 10 in terms of who they would pick and who they would prefer. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him available at 22, but I'd also be a bit surprised, if that makes sense.
Yeah. 22nd is such a weird spot. Yeah. I feel like, and I had this issue not last season, but the season before, when the Blue Jackets drafted, I think 24th overall, and they took Corson Kuhlmans. And by that point, I try and keep up with the prospects, and I do as much as I can. But once it gets to 22, I'm like, man, I don't know. There's like 4 guys here I would take. I'm just going to pick at random, And that's obviously NHL teams do not do that.
Yeah.
But to me, like, once you start getting into, like you said, like 17, 18, 19, that's when it really starts becoming, teams are going to pick who they like as opposed to the best player available by that point.
For sure. Absolutely. And that's kind of usually what you see, is that when you get to the 20s, usually the near guaranteed top 6 upside players, the guys who you think have a chance of making a first line or first pair down the line, usually those guys, they're gone. And if they're not, it's because there are some draft years where one team picks a defenseman way early, and then all the other teams are like, oh my God. And then pure panic. All the defensemen are gone off the board, especially the right-handed ones. And those are a bunch of guys who are probably going to be second pair defensemen. I'm thinking of David Reinbacher. I'm thinking of Tom Willander, those kinds of guys who might very well be gone by 15. That might get a couple of high upside guys to drop very far in this draft. But I mean, I've got Ritchie 23rd, and I'm almost certain that my top 22 is not going to go exactly as the draft is going to be. So there's going to be guys I value more who I think are going to be available. I'm thinking, as I mentioned, Jaden Perron, he's one of my favorites in this draft class. There might be a defenseman or two that might be a very, very good shout for the Blue Jackets to pick up in this range. I mean, there are a lot of options, but I feel like Ritchie is a safe bet because he's got the frame, he's got the intensity, and he's got the attitude to claw his way to the NHL in some capacity. It's just, for me, does he make it in a top 6 role, or does he make it in a bottom 6 role? I think that when you say middle 6, a lot of people tend to just assume that he's either going to be playing on a second or third line, but there's a big difference between the two for me, because if he's able to hold his own on a second line, that's one thing, especially with the amount of talent the Blue Jackets have added. They're going to have a loaded top six with a lot of skilled players. Can he complement those correctly, or is he stuck being the best player on a third line? That's the difference for me, and I'm still not sure where I sit there with Ritchie, but I feel like he's intelligent enough that he's a good complement to a scoring winger or a scoring center. With Ritchie, we've also got positional versatility, right? He can play center. He's played center most of the year. I see him more as a winger, but he can play that role pretty well as well, and he's got experience in that position. So he's a very versatile and very kind of surefire NHL type of bet. So if you're getting that at 22, I think it's a really, really decent shout.
Yeah, for sure. In a minute, we're going to finish off our conversation with Hadi about Calum Ritchie, and we're also going to talk a little bit about the Blue Jackets picking third overall. Who would Hadi pick? Who does he think the Blue Jackets are going to pick? And all of that. That's coming up next on Locked On Blue Jackets. Let's finish off by talking about third overall, because I have my guy that I like. So let's go through it. So let's go ahead and assume that the Blackhawks are going to take Connor Bedard. That feels like a pretty safe bet at this point. I'm trying my hardest to manifest the Ducks taking Matvei Michkov second overall, but let's go ahead and assume that they take Adam Fantilli second.
Yeah.
So Bedard and Fantilli are off the board. Who are you taking at third?
My pick is Matvei Michkov, but I assume that the Blue Jackets are going to go with Leo Carlsson because Jarmo Kekalainen loves his Swedes. And listen, Leo Carlsson isn't a consolation prize. He's a very, very, very decent hockey player. And he's so versatile, and I feel like position be damned, even if it was just Michkov and Carlsson. There is a gap for me. For me, Michkov has the potential to be a generational talent. But based on what the Blue Jackets need and based on what they could be getting in Leo Carlsson, which for me is at very, very least a second liner. I mean, that's the floor for him. And then you work up from there. That's fantastic at third overall. If you get a player who's almost pretty much guaranteed to be a second liner, and then you can work up from there and make him almost an elite player in the NHL, third overall, this draft class is ridiculous that you're able to get that value at third, fourth overall. I mean, if you guys are taking Carlsson, that means that San Jose has the opportunity to add a potential generational talent at fourth overall, which is ridiculous.
JD Young of Locked On Shark. We're very good friends, JD and I. He's really mad that Carlson's probably not going to drop to fourth. And I'm like, yeah, but you get Michkov. He's like, yeah, but I wanted Carlsson. I'm like, well, you can't have him. So that's been a point of contention in our group chat at the minute.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Yeah, Carlson's my guy as well. I know a lot of people are talking about Will Smith at the minute, but
it's too high.
I don't know. My thing with Will Smith is I feel like he's just a slightly different flavor of Kent Johnson. And you have a Kent Johnson, and I would much rather take a guy like Carlsson, who you put between, like you say, he projects as a minimum second line center. I think you go ahead and you put him between Johnny Gaudreau and Patrick Laine, and I don't think he needs to be elite. Yeah,
no, absolutely. He just needs to hold his own, which he already does in the SHL. He's putting up numbers on par with Sedin, with the Sedins, with the Alfredsons, and the Matt Sundins, and like his numbers right now in the SHL are absolutely ridiculous, off the charts, insane. So I mean, you're not getting a player who's not worth picking at third overall. He's probably a first overall. He's definitely a first overall pick last year. Probably in 2021. I mean, it's absurd the value you've got in this draft class. I'm still on the Michkov boat. I still think that a lot of the concerns have been overblown. And I think that he's made it clear he wants to come to the NHL. He's made it clear he wants to be an NHLer and make his career here. And he's got otherworldly skill. No one's ever, he's outscored Kuznetsov, he's outscored Ovechkin, he's outscored Tarasenko, like all of the players that were playing in Russia in their draft year, he's outscored them all. So you got to look at that production.
The only thing that would make me think that the Blue Jackets are going to go ahead and take Michkov is if they pick up a center somewhere else. If they go ahead and get Elias Lindholm from Calgary, for example, then I wonder, or do they move Patrick Laine in a trade to get? This is my current stupid fantasy thing, is thinking about different ways the Blue Jackets could land Austin Matthews. Like, do they send Patrick Laine to Toronto as part of a package for Matthews? Like, almost definitely not. But if you get Austin Matthews, then suddenly you can have a top line of Johnny Gaudreau, Austin Matthews, and Matvei Michkov, and like, so that's the only way that I can see the Blue Jackets picking up Michkov is if they end up with that center somewhere else.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
If he was a center, he would be nailed into that third overall spot. But I think at third overall, you've got to go positional. You've got to pick that center. You've got to get that number one center somehow. Yeah. And I think the draft is the best way to do it. And I think Karlsson is the best available.
He fits that mold.
Available center at third.
Yeah. No, he fits that mold so perfectly. Another reason I wouldn't consider Will Smith is, first, like you mentioned, he has a similar kind of profile to Ken Johnson in the sense that he's not the most quick-footed, but very skilled center with great hands. The big concern for me with Will Smith is he's different from Ken Johnson in the sense that Ken Johnson has adapted to his lack of foot speed. Will Smith hasn't. He plays like Trevor Zegras without the foot speed of Trevor Zegras, and that's a concern to me. That's why I've got Zach Benson ahead of him. For me, Zach Benson, if you want a center, you're not considering Michkov at all. Michkov's not an option. For me, it's between Leo Carlsson and Zach Benson, and it's just about who do you like more. Do you prefer size and skill, or do you prefer a well-rounded, incredible defensively, probably the most intelligent player in the draft in Zach Benson? It's just about what you prefer, right? I think Carlsson is still the pick because I think that his skill set projects so perfectly to the NHL. And like I mentioned, you're getting minimum a second line center, whereas with Benson, the width of possibilities with him is a bit kind of wider. You might get a third line center out of Benson max, but Benson's got a lot of upside, and I see something in him. I see the Braden Point, Mark Stone kind of elements where he plays. He's a worse skater than Will Smith, but I'm more concerned about Will Smith's skating than Benson's, because Benson has perfectly tailored his game to his skill. He's not trying to play faster than he is. He uses spacing, give and goes. He understands the game at a depth that if the Blue Jackets don't pick Karlsson and aren't picking Michkov, like Will Smith for me is pretty much the last pick I would make if I'm the Blue Jackets in that scenario. And it's not because I hate Will Smith. I still think he's a top 7, top 8 talent in this draft. I see concerns in this game that I don't see in Zach Benson's. And yes, Benson's small and whatever, but I mean, it's not a limiting factor.
That's what it is. Benson is what, 5'10", so
5'10", and that's not small. That's not small by any means. I mean, there's a lot of 5'10". He might even grow to 5'11". He's got room for growth as well. So I mean, for me, a lot of people look at my rankings and go like, oh my goodness, like Andrew Crystal 8th overall, Jaden Perron in the top 10, and they're like, what are you doing? These guys are small, they're never going to make it. I'm like, man, it's not a limiting factor. The guys that are small and it limits their game, you're off my board. Like it's not interesting to me. But players who are small and have tailored their game perfectly to their size, I'm sold. Then you add on top of that the puck skills and the intelligence and the spacing. And I mean, there's so many layers to it that you can't just look at a guy's size and be like, okay, he's going to struggle to physically in the NHL. Like I've seen Daniil Boots, 6'5", 200 pounds, get muscled off pucks by 5'9", 5'10" defenders in the NHL. It's size isn't what's going to make it for you. And on the contrary, I feel like smaller players have better mechanics because they've been smaller than everyone their entire lives and have had to tailor their game to that by developing the mechanics along the boards, by developing the ability to drop their weight, etc. So if you're looking at Karlsson versus Benson and being like, okay, well, this guy's bigger, so he's going to be better in the NHL, I'd be worried about that because I feel like Benson is a better player physically than Karlsson. And that's saying something because Karlsson is really good physically. So that's not a concern for me, you know?
Yeah, it's like you say, it's about how you adapt your game to it. If people want to learn more about Zach Benson, or if they want to get your prospect rankings, or even just kind of learn a little bit more about prospects in general, where can they find you and your work online?
Yeah, so Locked On NHL Prospects will be up pretty soon. We're restructuring right now, but I should have some content out before the draft, some rankings, some mock drafts, that kind of stuff. Might be there for draft day as well, so that we can kind of review every pick as it comes. So Locked On NHL Prospects will have some content in June, just not a daily thing. But the main place you can find everything I do, the one-stop shop, is my Twitter. It's HadiK_scouting. There I post my articles, I post my rankings, everything draft related, everything I write, everything I make in terms of videos, all goes on my Twitter. So one-stop shop, you go there, you find out everything about prospects.
Perfect. Thanks for sitting down with us today about Calum Ritchie, and I'm sure we'll have you back on Locked On Blue Jackets sometime very soon.
Absolutely. See you soon.
And that's all I've got for you today. Tomorrow, I believe we are going to talk about Igor Chinakhov. We're going to do his season review, so that should be fun. I have a lot of things to say. I'm sure Hayden has a lot of things to say as well. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the podcast at LO_Blue Jackets. You can find Hayden over at HaydenH971. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email us at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for making us your first listen of the day every day. Locked on Blue Jackets continues to be free and available on all podcast platforms, over on YouTube, and also the SiriusXM app. Until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.